Well, good afternoon, everybody. Can everybody hear me in the back? No? More volume? I don't know how to turn this thing up, but
Oh, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not dressed right. Are we getting better? We're good now? All right, good deal. Well, I'm going to do a demo today on a salt cell or salt cellar, salt box, goes by a lot of different names. It's actually just a lidded box with a little bit of a twist on it. It's got a hinged lid, and I'll show you some examples of them. Here's one. There's a pivot pin right here that is a little brass pin, and it pivots open like this. And then there's a magnetic catch. There's a little bit of a steel rod in here, and there's a magnet in the top so that it comes back and catches and locks it shut. Okay. So I've got notes here from my demo. There's a copy of them over there on the table. If you're interested enough to make one, you can take a picture of that and take it home with you, and you'll know, you'll have everything. You don't need to take any notes. I start with a blank that's anywhere from 3.5 by 3.5 by 3 to about 4 by 4 by 3. Something like this, okay? Well, Tom already did the demo on how to make this thing round. So we're just gonna go hocus pocus and it's round, okay? The other things that you need to do this are a steel rod, okay? This is a quarter inch piece of steel, brass rod that's 1/8 of an inch, and you need some rare earth magnets. And the rare earth magnets get attached to everything. They come a lot of times in a little assortment thing like this. You can get it from Amazon. They're not too expensive, but they work really well. They're very strong little magnets, and if they weren't in that bag, I probably couldn't hardly get them off of there. So that's basically what you need to, as far as supplies are concerned. This one is round. It's got a tenon on one end, so it's mounted in the chuck. This is kind of what they look like before I start. I'm going to pass a couple of samples around of ones that are already done that you can take a look at. And there's no limit to kind of how you want to design the things. They can be very simple. They all work pretty much the same. Any kind of wood you want. This one's ambrosia maple. I think that one came out really nice. And this one is beaded, and it's Bradford pear. Now, there's a couple keys in this thing to make this thing as easy as possible and avoid some of the mistakes that I've made. One is I make it round, I take it off the chuck, and I drill the hole. I guess I should tighten that on there, huh? I drill the hole, the 1/8 inch hole for the brass rod. That becomes the pivot pin on the lid on the drill press. It's important that hole be perpendicular. Otherwise, the lid won't close properly, okay? The other thing is you got to be really careful to mark where that hole, the bottom of that hole is. So what I usually do is I'll measure the depth of the hole, and then I'll draw a line on my blank right there. So I know when I'm shaping the outside of this thing, if I go in too far, I'm going to hit that hole. Okay, so you'll understand that better, I think, as we go. And the hole is about 3/16 of an inch from the edge, and then it's deep enough to go through what's going to be the lid, and approximately 1/2 inch or so into the base, and that way you get the pivot. Okay. Now, here's what happens. Is this the one? Here's what happens if you don't pay attention to where you drilled that hole. And I don't know how well you'll see this, but I'll pass it around. But when I turn the inside of this, Is it on the screen? I can't. No. Anyway, you'll see it when I pass it around that, yeah, there you go. When am I in the right place? No. Where am I at? Oh, there we go. We'll get it. I drilled into the hole, or I turned into the hole. So it doesn't work too well. So pass that one around. You can see my disaster. The other thing that happens is if that hole is not totally perpendicular, when you close the lid, it won't be flat. You'll have it raised up kind of like this. Okay. Now, the other thing is we're going to use this, put salt in theory, right? So you want to take a pinch of salt, you like grandma did, put it in something. You know, they never measured anything. It was always a pinch of this and a pinch of that. It's hard to get a pinch if you've got square corners like this. So this is a poor design. The bottom of it should be rounded all the way across instead of having square corners, because you're not going to be able to get that salt out of those corners very easily. Okay. So that's just not a good design on that one. And if you have any questions along the way, just yell. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to round over the top. All the ones that I have here have little knobs of some sort on the top. It's really unnecessary. You can put it on there if you want, but you really don't need it because of the way the swivel action on the thing. You never use it. You can just rotate it like that. So you can do anything you want on the top. You can embellish it any way you want to do it, or you can put a little knob on the top. It doesn't matter. Either way it works, but the little knob is not needed. So now I'm going to shape the top. I'm going to shape the bottom a little bit. And again, bearing in mind the depth of my drill hole is that line. Don't want to get into that. So mostly I'm worried about the top, getting it rounded over. And this one, I'm not going to put a knob on. I'm just going to leave it kind of rounded on the top. Let's take that off. And because I did have it between centers, I've got to take enough off to get rid of my little divot there. And I'll just shape it a little smoother. Okay, so that's really about all there is to it, making the top. We'll clean it up just a little bit. Okay, now at this point, I need to sand the top because I'm going to part it off. Once I part it off, it's going to be pretty hard to sand the thing. So at this point, I would sand the top. Probably not at 1300 RPMs, but and get rid of my tool mark there. Try to get rid of it anyway. A little too high. Okay, and I'm going to shape the rest of the thing. So I'm going to take off the corner on the bottom. Wasn't quite round there yet. And ultimately, I'm just going to part off that bottom section so I get rid of the recess that way. I left enough length of wood here that I can do that. At this point, you can do anything you want as far as shape is concerned, as long as we miss that hole. So you can get creative, you can beat it, you can embellish it any way you want to go. You can put burn lines in it. Really just about anything you want to do. Okay. And I'm going to sand a little more here. Now, I'm not going to sand too much. You'll get the idea. You guys know how to sand, right? Okay, so I lost my depth mark now on the hole. So I've got a part off the top, but I want to make sure that I do it so that I've got a good, at least 3/8 of an inch of the hole into the base. So I need to part it off right about here. I'm going to shoot for parting it off right about there, if you can see that mark. And a thin blade parting tool is best. Okay, why am I doing that? And you want the part to be straight in so that the lid of the salt box is flat. So what I tend to do is I'll go straight in a good ways in, and then when it starts to get tight, I'll angle it into the base, because the base we're going to hollow out a little bit anyway. So it doesn't matter if the base isn't flat. So I'll go straight and then angle it and go back to straight. Something is going on with this piece of wood that's making it bounce a lot. And then as I get almost through, I'm going to slow it down. Try not to throw this across the room. Okay. So that's off. So now you got to worry about the hole again, because we're going to hollow out the middle of this thing, but you can't see the hole when it's spinning. I can see it right now. I can see where the hole is, but once it starts spinning, I'm not going to see the hole. So I'm going to draw a line more or less through the middle of that hole, all the way around. And I'm going to spin it around, and I'm going to leave more or less 3/8 of an inch wall on this thing. And again, the bottom is just going to be rounded. It's going to be curved. The only other real important thing now is that I leave enough room on the bottom to part it off without running into my chuck jaws. And I realized after I got here that I left one important thing at home, and that's my drill. So part of this, you're just going to have to bear with me as I fake it. I got the bit, brought the bit, I just didn't bring the drill. No, I didn't bring the bits either, did I? I need a 1/4 inch and let me measure the magnet here. Yeah, wait, I need 2 drill bits, so. Try and measure it. You get sucked on there, you can't get it off. Yeah, I think I just need a 1/4 inch, Tom. That'll do for both. Okay, so now when it's stopped, I can see my hole. I've still got more room here. I can hollow out a little more. Yeah, let's get this thing going. And this demo is not going to take anything close to 4 hours, so you don't need to worry about that. And then I usually just use a scraper to kind of clean it up. Round nose scraper. I had everything sitting there in my shop to bring. Somehow managed to walk away without all of it. So I don't need this at all. So instead of putting another scrape on my elbow, I'll get rid of this thing. Nobody else has ever done that, have you? Anybody else ever done that? Turn his elbow. How about the scraper? Can you see the angle on that? Anybody who used one of these? What do you call this thing? Negative rake? Anybody use a negative rake scraper? Anybody have one besides? It's called a skew. It's exactly right. If you've got a skew, you've got a negative rake scraper. What I find with this thing, and this is the only one I own, I converted this one to a negative rake, is safe sanding. You're probably going to start one grit higher than you normally would by using this negative rake scraper, especially on something like this where, you know, there's not a lot to do. And when you watch somebody on YouTube and they say that it's all about the burr, they are not kidding. It's all about the burr, and the burr lasts a very short time. But the good news is when the burr is gone, take your honing card and at an angle, if you can see it, probably can't probably see it, but you just a couple passes like that, and you've got a burr back that you can actually feel with your fingernail. You don't have to go back to the grinder every time you lose your burr. You just make a new one real quick, and you're back in business. And without sanding, you get a pretty darn good finish without sanding at all. Okay, did we find the drill? Okay. We use the brass rod for a hinge pin. Okay, so you just need a short piece of brass rod. You can cut the brass pretty easily with some diagonal cutters, or you can use a cutter on a Dremel. You can do it with a hacksaw if you want, but it gets pretty raggedy. So what we want to do is grab the lid. Let me get the sandpaper. Okay. And I'm going to sand off this little thing I've got here in the middle that's sticking out. It's just, had I brought my drill, you know, I'd have sanded this off with the drill, but it's sitting at home in the garage. Okay, so I cut a little piece of this off, put it through the hole here, and put it into that hole. I want to kind of tap it in a little bit. Proper use of tools. And that tells me how long that thing needs to be cut off at. So you can see that much extending into the bottom. And I'm going to try and mark this with a pencil here. Pull that back out. It's not super easy to cut, but it does cut it. Okay, so now we'll put this back together. I'm a little long, but that's okay for now. Okay, so now we want to establish the point where the magnet and the piece of steel are going to go. Doesn't have to be exact. I just kind of line up approximately 180 degrees from my hinge pin. And then I mark it on both the top and the bottom with a pencil. Nice pencil line, isn't it? Did he come back? Did he find the drill or? He didn't come back. He left. Okay, so what I would do now is I'd take a little piece of the steel rod. Now, I'll tell you, you can cut this brass thing with these. There ain't no way you're cutting that steel rod with these. I use a cutter on my Dremel. And where I've got that mark, I'm going to put the steel piece in the bottom. I'm going to drill a hole right there, and I'm going to insert this so that it's flush with the top edge. Okay, so now that I've got it marked and I've got that in there, I will then drill another hole here on the top and insert one of these rare earth magnets into the hole that's drilled on the top. And the good thing about them is you don't lose them in the sawdust because they're going to stick wherever you drop them. And they're amazingly strong little magnets. Okay, well, while we're waiting for that, I'm going to use some a homemade version of Yorkshire grit. First, I got to get rid of that pencil mark. See if I can just erase it off of there. I might have to sand it off a little bit. Yeah, sand it a little bit. No drill bit? Okay. Yeah. Okay, so I sand off the pencil mark. I'm just going to round over this inside edge here a little bit. And the outside. Okay. And like I said, this is a homemade version of Yorkshire grit. Pretty much the same thing, only it's a lot cheaper. Beeswax, mineral oil, and diatomaceous earth. So it is food safe. Everything in it's food safe. Yeah. Diatomaceous earth is, if you've never heard of it, it's used in a lot of makeup. It's used in a lot of different things like chapstick and things like that to give it a little bit of a grit and to make it stick better. But it is food safe. It's also used as an insecticide. So there is a non-food safe version of it. I'm not really sure there's any difference. It's basically some kind of ground up coral. And it's a real fine powder. In the bag, it's like dust. I mean, it's this real fine powder. But when you mix it in, it gives the grit to the thing. Okay. And on the outside, I would do the same thing with the sanding grit. Tom, where'd Tom go? Do we have a drill? Do you have no drill? Okay. Well, I'm sorry. You know, hey, you get what you pay for, guys. So what I would do with this at this point is to pull that brass rod out, put it in here, and sand it down to match the shape on the lid. Okay, and then CA the brass rod into the lid, and make sure you get it spun right so that the shape matches the lid. No, No, you use pretty coarse sandpaper. You know, actually, I brought that. This is a 40 grit sanding disc. You know, it's one of the Rolock discs, but it's 40 grit, and that's what I use to shape it. And then I'll use finer grit to smooth it out. But I'll use the 40 grit to get the shape in. And then, you know, and then go finer. So anyway, once it's shaped, then you cut the final length. You don't necessarily want a real smooth cut. It doesn't matter. Matter of fact, if the cuts crushes it a little bit, it's really better because it will help prevent it from pulling out too easy. So when the lid comes off, it won't come out super easily. Okay. And then the magnets, you drill the 2 holes, get them flush with the surface on both the top and the base, and then CA glue those in place as well. And that's basically it. We got to part it off now. That's the only thing left to do. Any questions? Yes.
If you guys have questions, we'll use the mic so we can pick it up on the recording and those on Zoom. And maybe you covered it, Tom. I'm sorry, I was wandering around a lot. But when you go to put the magnets in, is it critical on getting them right above each other, or so the lid, or do you install them and then return?
It's not real critical. I drew the line on the outside of where they're going to go, but it doesn't have to be perfect. They've just got to be fairly close, and it'll catch.
So I guess the brass rod keeps it aligned.
Brass rod keeps it aligned. Yes, the brass rod keeps the lid aligned, and then as it rotates around, and if you look at the ones that are out there somewhere, you can see the magnets in the top, the brass rods in the bottom. If you line the thing up perfectly and take the lid off, which you can do, you'll find they're not perfect. They're not perfect, but that magnet, those little magnets are amazingly strong, and they'll catch that thing.
So do you always go with the magnet in the top?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
That's what I do. I usually, I don't know that it makes a difference, really. You could do it either way, but that's usually the way I do it, is put the magnet in the top.
Magnets from Amazon?
Amazon, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah, you get that whole package of them for like, I don't know, $10 or something. And then you try and keep them from sticking to everything you get near. And they stick on pretty good. And again, you can do any kind of design you want. You know, you can do it. This one's a pretty simple one. You can do it like this. You can do the beaded. You can use, you know, Sorby tools to embellish it. Anything you want to do to it. Yes.
Do you tend to do the final finishing before you do the magnet hinge assembly?
No, not really. No, I'll have the magnets in. I'll be all done before I'll put the final finish on, whether that's polyurethane or what I've been doing on them is walnut oil for the final finish. So it's food safe. So that tends to be what I use. I mean, polyurethane is too eventually, but walnut oil is food safe immediately. So that tends to be what I use for them. Yes.
In working with RC airplanes, not using little magnets. Working with RC airplanes, I'd use those small magnets, and you got to get them right side up, otherwise they will repel.
Only if you're putting 2 magnets together. So I have a steel rod in the bottom, so it doesn't matter then.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's okay. See another question back there?
Yeah, so Tom, what do you do with when you turn the tenon off? Do you turn it off? Do you jam chuck it? What do you do?
I part it off. I just use a parting tool and part it off.
Great, man.
That parting tool wasn't liking me today, so I'm going to use a different one. And the only thing you got to remember is how far my jaws are in here, so I'll catch my jaws. Okay, and it's a really Actually, it's a tenon, it's not a recess, so I won't catch them. It's a real thin tenon. And I usually use the wiggle method a lot. You know, you can do a parting tool and a half, or you can just kind of wiggle it back and forth. A little more speed. And I'll part it off at an angle in like that so that it'll sit better. And if there's any wood movement, hopefully it's not going to start rocking. Okay, so shall we have fun and see how far I can shoot this thing across the room? No? Okay. Just thought I'd ask. So that's it. You know, the top needs the grit, sanding grit on it. The brass needs to get trimmed off. And of course, the other part's drilled. And that's really all there is to it. Any other questions? Yes. No. The reason I don't do that is if I don't have one. If you're using this thing, it's a reference point for which way it opens. So if it's sitting on your stove or by your stove and you want some salt, you can see that pin sticking up, so you've got a reference. You could plug it. You could not drill it all. Well, no, you can't drill. You got to drill the whole way through, or you'll never get them aligned right.
You ever use a vacuum chuck instead of just parting it off, or is it just easier? No?
I haven't. You
Okay.
could. It's pretty small though. I don't.
Okay. just
You
part-
know, I would just part it off like that, and then I'd use a sanding disc on my drill to sand it. Or I could use the vacuum chuck to put this on to sand the bottom off too. But it's a pretty small thing to vacuum chuck.
Any other questions? All right, let's give him a big round of applause.